First up, we have Dan Brinton. You can go to the next slide, Richard. We have Dan Brinton. He's a senior technical success manager at Domo. He's been here for 4 years, really knowledgeable on this topic. He's also helps run the Data Vision Leader CAB, which is really fun. He's going to be talking about automating data validation using alerts. Dan, you can take it away.
Cool, thanks. Hey, everybody. Happy to be here with you all. Thanks for being here. So as Anna mentioned, I've been here almost 4 years. August will be my 4-year anniversary. And when I first came to Domo, one of the things that really excited me about the platform was the focus and really the feature set to support it, but the focus on making data actionable, right? So rather than just having reports that someone would have to go and find somewhere, or better than even just, interactive and responsive dashboards, was this idea of pushing information to decision makers, right? And one of the ways that we make that possible on the Domo platform is alerts. That being said, my experience is that it's maybe one of the underutilized pieces of the platform. And so I want to take a minute today and talk about alerts and boost alerts a little bit. And I've got this, I kind of framed this in the context of a data validation use case. Let me share my screen. I've got a couple of slides we're going to look at, and then I've got a demo as well. So again, alerts in the context of data validation. Data validation, the validity of data is obviously central to the success of your Domo program. And so it should be kind of front and center for all of us, right? So I want to talk a little bit about what I mean by data validation in my use case here. I've got some data pipeline. It could be, it's probably a connector or several connectors. Maybe it's a couple of daisy chained magic ETL data flows or whatever, right? I've got some data pipeline with some business logic in it. And that data or that pipeline writes to a data set or a set of data sets that then support dashboarding, right? So in addition to that, I've got this validation data. In my use case, this is just my raw data, okay? But it could also be some summary level data. But the point is, this validation stream is kind of in parallel to the true data pipeline, right? Because the point is, we want to have a point of comparison between the output from our relatively complex data pipeline and the sort of the raw data that can serve as our point of validation. Then we've got a data flow where we're actually going to do the validation itself. And we're going to capture the results in a couple of different ways. One is going to be just a snapshot of the current state of validation, right? So is the data valid or not? And then the other is I want to capture a history of any validation issues that may have arisen and the dates and times at which those issues were resolved, right? I want to have a living history of the validation issues and their resolution, because I want to give confidence to my teams and to my stakeholders. And then I've got a validation dashboard where myself, as maybe the owner of this data pipeline, this is someplace where I can go and I can quickly take the temperature of my data pipeline and confirm that it's valid, and I can wipe my brow and move on to the other important things I need to be doing. I should say I am going to take questions at the end, but if there are any kind of pressing questions that come up, go ahead and chat them. And Richard or Anna, if you see questions come in, if you would just stop me, I'm not going to be able to look at the chat while I'm presenting. Cool, thanks a lot. So I want to take a minute and just talk about this validation data flow. I will pull this up in the instance as well, but this is what I've got in Magic ETL. There's a lot going on here, but let me just summarize it very quickly. Here across the top, this is the results of our data pipeline, right? So this is our transformed data. And all I'm doing here is I'm just summarizing it, okay? And for my sake, by the way, my fake data is like sales transactions. And so I've decided that the level of granularity that's appropriate for my validation is per month, per product, per region. Okay, that was completely arbitrary, but that was my decision that would say, if everything checks out at that level, that gives me comfort that my results are valid, right? So there's my transformed data, and I'm now summarizing it. Here's my raw data, and I'm also summarizing it to the same level. Okay, so here we got this idea of our two parallel streams, and then we're going to bring them together here. We'll just do this join, and here we'll in this formula tile, all I'm doing is checking to see basically, do the two numbers match, right? Do the sales amount from the transformed data match the sales amounts from the raw data? Nothing more than that. And then I output that result to one of these output data sets. Then the rest of all this is where I'm capturing this idea of the living history of validation issues. And basically there are three parts to that. One is new issues that are popping up for the first time. Another is ongoing issues that are now continuing to be ongoing or have been resolved on some prior run of the data flow of the validation check. And then the last is sort of historical validation issues that have already been resolved. And the combination of these three then is all my validation issues, past and present, and their status. And I'm realizing that I just talked through all these bullet points already. Perfect. Okay, cool. Then we can talk about dashboards and alerts. So for my use case, like I said, I want to put together a dashboard where I can very quickly go and see, is my data valid, right? So I've got this, I'm showing this in a couple of different ways. I've got a gauge card that's literally just a green check or a red X indicating the state of the validity of my data. And then I've got a couple of other cards that show the ongoing issues. And then finally, I've got alerts on all that stuff. I've got a card alert, and I've also got a data set alert. And I'll talk about that as we do this demo. Let me switch over to my Domo instance, which you are hopefully seeing now. Okay. So I mentioned I've got my data pipeline, and I should say, in my case for this demo, my data pipeline is extremely simple, right? It's literally just an input and a filter and an output. The whole point of this is I want to be able to quickly simulate what's going to happen when there is some issue in my data pipeline, right? That could come in, those issues could come in the form of a source data platform is down, or a connector fails, or somebody made some change in the business logic that was unexpected, or we've got, you know, an exploding join, or there was some filter condition, some data condition that we didn't take into consideration when we built the filters and whatever else, right? Point is, there's all different kinds of ways that validity issues could arise. Again, for my demo, I'm just trying to simulate very simply what happens when that kind of thing does arise. So that's my data pipeline. Here is the data flow we just looked at a moment ago, where we're doing the actual validation work. And then finally, let me show you what I put together in terms of this data validation dashboard. So here I've got the green check. All this means is that as of this moment right now, my data is valid. And again, I told you I'm validating at the month and product and region level, right? So for all months, products, and regions, there are no validation issues presently. This other table, and I actually really like this idea. I've captured the historical or the past validation issues as they've arisen, right? And you can see when the issue first popped up and when it was resolved, and then sort of the summary information about it, right? So the year and month, the region, and the product ID that was affected, and also something about the size of the validation issue, right? This one says it's resolved because it's now the validation is checked out, right? And because it's resolved, it also has a resolved date. So this is a nice way of being able to, one, build confidence, I think, in stakeholders, saying, hey, look, I'm monitoring this kind of thing, and also keeping track of the issues as they arise. So let me just demo this for you quickly, and we'll talk about the alerts part of this in just a moment. So here's my data pipeline, and let's say that somebody goes in here and oops, now somebody introduced a filter condition that's going to cause a data validation problem. Okay, so my data pipeline is now running, and we'll give it just a moment. It's funny, when I was putting this demo together, 18 seconds felt pretty quick. Now, as I'm feeling all of you watch over my shoulder, 18 seconds feels like an eternity. So my data pipeline is now run, and now my pipeline validation process is running. Okay, and that's now done. And now if I come back over to my validation dashboard and refresh this, I'm going to see a couple of things. One, I see that, oh, we do have a validation issue that has cropped up, right? So in one year and month, region, and product, there's some validation issue somewhere. I've also captured that issue in the log, right? And I've said that the status is open. And therefore it has no resolution date, but I have the information about it, right? So this is giving me a way, I now have at least a head start in knowing where that validation issue has arisen. Okay, so this is nice. Sorry, was there a question? Okay. Yeah, so I've identified my validation issue here on the dashboard, right? It's clear to be seen. I've also got a couple of alerts built on this. So one of them here. So this is just a card alert based on this card here, right? And it tells me that there's currently one open validation issue, right? Now, I've got this particular alert configured such that it's going to fire every time this data set updates and there is still a validation issue outstanding, right? So every time the data updates, every time the validation process runs, as long as there is one or more open validation issues, I'm going to get that alert, right? I've also got a data set alert based on this validation issue log data. And what's nice about the data set alert, well, a couple of things. One, I've got it configured that I only want it to send me an alert when a new validation issue arises, right? That is to say, we've got one validation issue open right now. When the validation process runs again, that validation issue is still going to be open, but I'm not going to get another alert about it, right? And, arguably that's how I want it. I want to be notified when the issue arises. I don't necessarily want to be, reminded with a poke in the eye every time the validation process runs afterward. And so I was able to set that up using a data set alert. The other thing that's nice about the data set alert is that in the alert itself, we capture some of that information, right? So we've got the year and month, the product ID, and the region, and also the size of the difference. Okay, so another cool thing that I was able to do with alerts is use the alert actions. And I want to just show you this. So here's my validation card. Here's the alert. I'll click into it. So first of all, you can see it's only been shared with me, but I've set up the alert action. And so I'm actually writing the alert information to the Domo JSON webhook connector, right? And so what this allows me to do is capture a log of all the alert trigger events, right? So this is now like 2 or 3 layers of meta. But the point is now I'm able to see not only that an alert was triggered, I'm able to see the history of when alerts were triggered. And that's what I'm showing here. So I have each time the alert was triggered and the message. I've also got the same thing for that data set alert. And again, the nice thing about the data set alert is I'm able to capture this information about the validation issue, right? So I've got the time it was triggered. I've also got the time or the information about the specific validation issue. These two data sets are in some sense duplicative, but what's nice about this is I'm able to see, again, a log of the alert trigger events, right? So each time the alert email goes out, for example, that's going to be captured here. And I want to show you just one other thing about these alert actions. So let me come back to, so here's my pipeline validation, and I've got my 2 output data sets. This is like the current state of validation, and here's my log. So this is the data that's driving this validation issue log card, right? And I've got an alert set on this log data. And there it is. So once again, I'm writing the alert information to a Domo JSON webhook connector, so I can capture the alert trigger event. But I'm also using the other action type that we make possible in alerts, which is projects and tasks integration. And so if I come over to my Domo projects and tasks, hopefully I just need to refresh this. Okay, good, there it is. So here, I set up that integration, and it has created a task in this data validation issues project that I created. It's created this task, and now I have a task that I could assign to someone, right? So if I'm the manager of the data engineers or the BI team, I've got my validation dashboard in place, so I can really quickly go and see the status. I've got alerts set up, so I'm going to get an email and a push notification or a text or whatever, however I configure that each time there's a validation issue. I've got all that alert information captured on the dashboard itself, and I've also got this task now that I can assign to someone on my team, right? And say, hey, we've got a data validation problem. Richard, I need you to look into this, right? And then, of course, once it's done, once we've fixed the issue, right? So in our case, it's very simple to fix the validation issue. So I'll rerun that now that the issue is resolved, and we'll wait our 17 to 20 seconds.
Dan, we had a couple of questions in the chat.
Oh, this is a perfect time for those questions. Yeah.
Yeah. So one thing that I think was answered, but just that just to confirm that the webhook is connected to the Domo JSON connector.
Yeah, let me show you that actually. Yes, the pipeline has now run. Let me show you those connectors. So it's the JSON webhook connector, and the way this works is, well, oops. So this gives you a URL that is basically listening for a JSON document, right? So the connector, you can configure the connector to send you can configure the alert action to send a JSON object to this webhook URL. Okay, and for each instance of the webhook connector, there's a unique webhook URL. And then I've got my alert. Let me come back here. I've got my alert configured to send to one of those specific webhook URLs. And you can see here, this is the actual information. So it's going to be a post. So it's going to post this JSON, and you can see this is customizable, right? It's going to post this JSON to this webhook URL, and this webhook URL is the unique URL for a particular instance of the JSON webhook connector. That answer that question?
That was okay, Scott. And then there was another question. Maybe you can save it to the end or not, or it's more of a comment about if you don't have a card on a data set, then it might get archived. So even if you have an alert set on it, I don't know if we know the answer to that off the top of our heads. So.
No, I don't. I'm not sure I understand the question. actually.
I think it was.
Yeah, it was just a call out on that one. Something we experienced, that if you have a data set that's part of a series of data flows or a data flow, and maybe you have an alert set up on that data set to tell you if it ran, if it didn't run, it will archive if you don't have cards specifically tied to it. And then when it gets archived, the alerts actually shut off. So it's sort of like just the FYI, right? The way you set it up with a dashboard and a series of cards that you've got, you're probably accessing them routinely. You're probably fine. But if you have, a scenario where you're setting it up specifically on the data itself, and so you don't really need to view anything because you're depending on those alerts. If it gets archived, those alerts will stop.
Yeah. Okay. Great call. I think I understand now. Yeah. So what I think you're saying is, if Domo identifies a data set that's not being used to support cards, it can be put in like that archived mode. And in that status, the data set alerts on that data set are not going to fire. I think you're probably right about that. And in my case, I don't think that's going to be a concern, because I do have cards built on all those data sets, but it's a good call out. Thank you.
You bet.
Okay, so that we fixed the issue in the pipeline. The pipeline ran, then the validation process ran, and now you can see our dashboard is showing all clear, and you can also see that issue that had arisen before has now been resolved. So now I can come back to my projects and tasks, and I can throw some confetti because I have successfully resolved my data validation issue. I think that's everything I wanted to cover. Let me just look at my notes here. Yeah, I think that's it. I think we can open it up for questions at this point.
Any questions? Feel free to post them in the chat. Oh, here we got a couple coming in. Lots of good questions.
Can we do a segment on setting up recursive flows? Yeah, that's a good one. Actually, let me make a quick statement on recursive data flows. Recursive data flows, they have their place, right? I don't have a problem using a recursive data flow for this use case, because I am expecting the number of data validation issues to be very small, right? So a recursive data flow that's involving, tens or hundreds or even thousands of rows is really not going to be a problem. When we start seeing recursive data flows involving millions or tens or hundreds of millions of rows, then the recursive data flows just slow down, and eventually it's not really a workable solution. So I used them here. I don't have a problem using them in a situation like this. I would feel perfectly comfortable, clearly, recommending this approach to our customers. But recursive data flows are not going to be appropriate for really huge data sets, and really even moderately large data sets. But here, where we're talking about tens or maybe hundreds of validation issues that would arise over the course of time, no problem using a recursive data flow for that. Let's see. I'm just looking at some questions. Okay.
And there's one about creating tasks in the project management.
Oh, does it create a new task each time? Yeah. So that task creation was based on the dataset alert, and that dataset alert only triggers when a new validation issue has been identified. So the way I built the logic, if there's a new issue, obviously that'll trigger the alert. If there's a new issue that's been resolved, that doesn't trigger the alert because I'm basically just updating an existing row. If later, after it's been resolved, if that same validation issue came back up, yes, it would create another task at that point. But basically there's going to be there's going to be one task created for each alert trigger on that data set alert.
And then there's a couple more questions, and then let's if there are more questions, again, feel free to post them. And what we'll generally do is post these videos on the dojo. One of the questions was around if you'll be available to answer questions. And am I safe to say that if we post this video on the dojo and people have questions about it, that you can respond in the dojo so that everyone can kind of see those questions that are answered?
Yep, I can do that.
And then the other question was around if alerts can be shared with the group.
Man, that's a question I should know. I should be able to answer off the top of my head. Let's see.
If you want, Dan, you can look into it and just post it in the chat.
So it looks like, I'm just looking at the user interface. It looks like I can share with groups, yes. And okay, Catherine, thanks. Catherine agrees.
Oh, yeah, and then there was another question, Dan. If I know we built this in Dojo-Domo. So if you're participating in the community, you can get access to that Domo instance. And I think Elliot's stuff is posted in there as well. Often we can post the JSON. So maybe in that Dojo post, we'll post the JSON as well.
Cool.
Awesome.
So again,
thanks so much.
Yeah, go ahead, Anna.
Yeah, we're going to move on to the next. Thanks so much, Dan. That was awesome.
Thank you all.